In 2014, Russia annexed the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Subsequently, a smoldering military conflict began in the border regions of Ukraine with Russia. This material was created after the start of the open military conflict between Russia and Ukraine in 2022, which continues to this day. Ukraine is very rich in natural resources, fertile lands, and has a vast number of factories. All the wealth of Ukraine belonged to capitals of different countries: Ukrainian, Russian, American, Polish, German, and so on. The military invasion is linked to the redistribution of Ukraine's wealth in the interests of rival groups of monopolistic capital. Ukraine and Russia were part of the USSR. During the USSR, natural resources and enterprises belonged to the working people, meaning the profits they generated were distributed in the interests of society rather than accumulating in the pockets of private owners, as it happens today. The conflict between the former Soviet republics is very painful for ordinary people. On both sides of the barricades, people have relatives. War is a huge tragedy for them. However, the authorities of both countries impose myths of national exceptionalism and some deep-seated enmity on other citizens. In reality, this enmity is inherent only to the oligarchs of the warring countries. With the onset of the military conflict, we felt it our duty to speak out against the absurdities propagated by the pro-government TV hosts and paid bloggers online. They all promote barbarism. The ordinary workers of the warring countries will never forgive them for this. Today, based on official data alone, the number of casualties from the Russian side exceeds 70,000 people. This marks the largest military conflict involving Russia since the World War II.
For in every age it has been the tyrant, the oppressor, and the exploiter who has wrapped himself in the cloak of patriotism, or religion, or both, to deceive and overawe the people. Every solitary one of these aristocratic conspirators and would-be murderers claims to be an arch-patriot. Every one of them insists that the war is being waged to make the world safe for democracy. What humbug! What rot! What false pretense!
This material will be beneficial to the international audience, who will be able to draw parallels with their own nations. Ultimately, the video is intended to show that the working people of different countries have nothing to divide. Wars are instigated by ruling classes, while the powerless classes perish in them.
The Ukrainians claim Crimea is ours. The Russians respond, no, Crimea used to be ours and will be ours. I'd say so to summarize. Crimea has become Rottenberg's, because he has gotten 10 resorts, 178 landlots, and 760 facilities. Any more questions whose Crimea is? Who do you think Russia belongs to? And whom does Ukraine belong to? And do national interests exist anywhere besides state propaganda? No, there are no such interests. The state does not belong to a nation. It is only an apparatus in the hands of oligarchs. You can't say that oil, natural resources, enterprises and communications are people's property, can you? A state is an administrative organ that manages a country and makes laws in the interests of oligarchs. It is a tool for oppression. Shining examples of this are pension reforms across many countries, like France or Russia, which have increased exploitation of common people. There are numerous other cases of state care for its people. Toughening rules for holding rallies and strikes, beggarly living wages, no regulation of prices for housing and essential products, creation of such living conditions in the less successful countries that would push huge masses of people from there to Europe. All of the above, of course, were responsible democratic decisions for the sake of the population majority. The proverbial national interests are in fact just interests of the national ruling class. The military events unfolding in Ukraine can in no way be considered as a national conflict, since neither Russian nor Ukrainian nation are unified. Every nation is internally divided in two, the capitalist one and the proletarian one, whose interests are not just different, they're objectively opposite. This concerns not only Ukraine or Russia. This logic is applicable to any state in the world. A bugaboo image of Russia presented by European and US media can totally be applied to them. For example, there are no homogeneous United States. They are internally divided into proletarians and capitalists too. Consider a huge gap in availability of medical aid. Poor Americans can afford only the cheapest insurance programs. And the more the proletariat is exploited inside its country, the more hypocritical are calls to rally around national interests. All meaning of the so-called Western civilizational path of Ukrainian oligarchic power was and is not to create conditions for better well-being of Ukrainian people, but by subsequently serving the geopolitical opponents of Russia to preserve billions of dollars stolen from Ukrainians and hidden in Western bank accounts. But it's totally different matter with the country you live in, where there are no oligarchs, right? We all live under capitalism. All our states serve the oligarchs' interests. All states in the world. That's why now the state of Russia protects interests of Russian capital in the first place. It doesn't really give a thing for the lives of the Ukrainians or Ukrainian Nazis. Nazis are simply a propagandistic image, summoned to justify any crimes. Just like the presence of chemical weapons in Iraq was an excuse for the US to bomb it. Any battle of any capitalist state is not a fight to destroy the Nazis or terrorists. It is a competition for property, resources, territories, and markets. The real Nazis, of course present both in Ukraine and Russia, will not suffer from such a war. Rather the opposite. The war will strengthen the Nazi positions, become a nutritive medium for atrocities, and stimulate numerical growth of Nazis. Does Russia really fight the Ukrainian Nazi regime to the death, as it proclaims both domestically and internationally? Of course not, rather the opposite. And now the grateful descendants have demolished Lenin's monuments in Ukraine. And they call this decommunization. You want decommunization? Well, we're totally fine with it. But don't stop halfway. We're ready to show the real meaning of decommunization to Ukraine. Fascism was right insofar as it proceeded from a healthy national patriotic feeling, without which no nation can establish its existence or create its culture. Russian claims to fight fascism are becoming more and more absurd. In Russia, they memorialize Hitler's henchmen. On the state level, popularize fascist philosopher Ivan Ilyin, from the president's speeches to school programs. Provide a podium to modern ideologist Alexander Dugin, who earlier not once openly praised fascism. In Ukraine, the ongoing conflict only reinforces positions of fascists like Turchinov, Avakov and Kolomoisky, both in government and in business. In this war, both sides, not unreasonably, accuse each other in fascism. And both sides do demonstrate fascist tendencies. At the very moment the European governments play an active part in supplying arms to Ukraine, thereby aggravating their own citizens' problems. Because militarism ultimately invoices its bills to these ordinary folks who don't need any war. Proletarians of not only Russia and Ukraine suffer, they do in every country participating in the conflict. Just look, a capitalist cannot help but rub his hands anticipating manifold profits, even on the verge of an apocalypse. And it is not about any specific national leader at all. Life can't improve from overthrowing a single person, a president for example, without changing the economic system that produces such militaristic leaders. It is not presidents, but the logic of capital that unleashes wars. The recent decades of Ukrainian history illustrate that you could replace one president with another again and again without changing the essential course. All because the economic system remains the same. Russian invasion of Ukraine is an exam in Marxism, which many Marxists in both Russia and Ukraine have failed. They argue that if there are Nazis in Ukraine, let our capitalists defeat them, because Nazism is a greater evil compared to Russian capitalism. Of course, Nazism, especially in Hitler's incarnation, is despicable. But you need to understand that Nazism doesn't appear out of the blue, but grows directly from capitalism's logic. Capitalists impose hatred between the proletarians of different countries to make people stand up for not their motherland, but their masters. But please don't waste your words on picturing your oligarchs as being good and robbing their nation in a humanly manner, and foreign ones as being vicious and horrible. The power with which capitalists exploit the proletariat is determined not by the national or cultural identity of a capitalist, but by the level to which the country's means of production are developed. It is impossible to exploit the proletariat more than this level allows to, and to exploit less is something capitalists can't afford themselves to, since it means losing in the competition. Capitalists are the same in all nations. Their essence is defined not by their personal qualities, but by their economical position. Patriotism is not love for one's motherland, land, culture and people, as it might appear. It is not a feeling of national pride. This is not the essence of patriotism. Patriotism is about something else. The nature of patriotism is a love for one's state. It is not for nothing that patriots conceal the obvious, that state and country, motherland and people, are not one. Moreover, they are opposite. That state is an organization of the ruling class for the purpose of forcibly keeping the exploited classes in the condition of oppression. It is this love for the apparatus of violence over the working people, only slightly disguised by either Russian birches or the Ukrainian viburnum or the stars and stripes, that a conscious supporter of the working people should kill in himself. That state is an organization of the ruling class for the purpose of forcibly keeping the exploited classes in the condition of oppression. If this class is a bourgeoisie with imperialistic habits, there's no way you should support its state and your own bourgeoisie, as it will ultimately lead to not serving your motherland and its people, but to its enemies, the national bourgeoisie, which oppresses and exploits the proletariat of their own country in the first place. It drains the vital juices from its own people and uses them as a cannon fodder in wars for its own interests. Here a question arises for people calling themselves patriots. Why don't our current oppressors, which day by day ruin our industry and culture, which have deprived you of participation in ruling your own country, which exploit you in your own country, the capitalists, why don't they evoke your patriotic feelings and a burning desire to rise up to defend your motherland? The proletarians of different countries do not need war. But in this case, this fact has nothing to do with the pacifist, abstract slogan "No to war," shouted by liberals. War is an inseparable attribute of imperialism. Dreaming of a peaceful life under an economic system that inevitably breeds war means being naive commoners, pawns in the hands of circumstances. Peace in capitalism is only a temporary truce, fraught with even more destructive wars. To truly fight for peace, it is necessary to unite against capitalism. And the proletarian slogan could be "Peace to the workers, war to capitalism." After all, capitalism is the real enemy, unlike the working people of different countries who have nothing to divide. But to fight against capital, one must be a consistent internationalist. Being an internationalist in a situation where states are at war is especially difficult. For example, during the First World War, even the Second International did not pass this test of knowledge of Marxism. Almost every member of the Communist League supported his government, justifying it by the defensive nature of the war. It was a shameful betrayal of the proletarians of all the countries who were now dying on the battlefields of this senseless slaughter. But to remain true to internationalism, even in the most challenging conditions, is necessary if you genuinely want to stand on the side of the working people, both of your own country and of other countries. It is essential to follow the same path that Lenin once followed. Ukraine named after Vladimir Lenin. He is its author and an architect. Putin is right in saying that Lenin, indeed, did a lot for Ukraine. He did everything to ensure that Ukraine not only existed, but also for the Ukrainian proletariat to realize its interests and stand together with the Russian proletariat against capital. However, Ukraine also had its own revolutionary tradition, represented by Taras Shevchenko, Franko, Lesya Ukrainka, and other prominent figures of Ukrainian culture, whom Ukrainians are proud of.
These are Cossacks. These are people's loyal sons. The Ukrainians, the Russians, the Bolsheviks. And you, as our great Shevchenko put it, glorious great-grandfathers, filthy grandsons.
Lenin hadn't even attended high school when Franko was already translating the 24th chapter of Capital and Anti-Düring by Engels into Ukrainian. In the 1890s, the organization Ukrainian Social Democracy was founded. It conducted extensive translation and literary activities, raising Ukrainian workers to conscious life. Among its founders was Lesya Ukrainka, a classic of Ukrainian literature. In 1902, another Ukrainian classic, Franko, with the active assistance of Lesya Ukrainka, organized the publication of the Manifesto of the Communist Party in Lviv, in the Ukrainian language. Lenin was personally acquainted with another classic of Ukrainian literature, Mykhailo Kotsiubynsky, whose children played a significant role in establishing Soviet power in Ukraine. If you want to support not the bourgeoisie, but the Ukrainian and Russian proletariat in the conditions of their confrontation, you must work towards uniting the great Russian and Ukrainian revolutionary traditions, rather than choosing between supporting Putin and supporting Zelensky. This is absolutely necessary, so that in the future representatives of the Ukrainian and Russian proletariat can not only converse without hatred, but also unite against capital. For Russian leftists today, the choice is between supporting Putin or supporting Lenin. If you are for Lenin, then you are also for what the best representatives of the Ukrainian culture fought for in their time. By doing so, you truly align yourself with those Ukrainian leftists who are on the side of their working people. You stand on the side of the working people of both Russia and Ukraine. The victories of the Russian proletariat in the events of the October Revolution and the Great Patriotic War are shared victories of the Russian and Ukrainian proletariat. And future victories can also only be shared. The shameful slavery and all the miseries associated with it can also only be shared. If you choose internationalism, nothing should prevent you from seeing the fundamental opposition of interests between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie in any country, and conversely, emphasizing the common interests of the proletariat of all countries. A conscious communist must fight against all manifestations of chauvinism and nationalism, explaining the common interests of the Russian and Ukrainian proletariat. It is necessary to show that in this conflict, the division between Russians and Ukrainians and their confrontation benefits only the bourgeoisie, while the proletariat only suffers blood, death, poverty, and degeneration. In the USSR, different nations did not wage wars against each other. However, There were disputes, misunderstandings, and animosities among them. The Russian Empire left the Soviet Union with numerous national problems in the Caucasus and Central Asia. Lenin often referred to the Russian Empire as a prison of nations, particularly emphasizing the oppression of the Russian people. The absence of inter-ethnic wars in the USSR was not solely due to Soviet internationalist ideology. Believing that calls for friendship and brotherhood alone can stop national discord is naive folly, as seen in many modern pacifists. The only means to halt violence among people is through common labor. Socialized labor signifies the end of violence. The trend towards the socialization of labor in the USSR united representatives of different nations. However, many challenges in developing free socialized labor, overcoming its capitalist nature, remained unresolved, and the focus on addressing them was lost. Consequently, the construction of socialism in the USSR ultimately led to the establishment of, as is known, imperialist capitalism. However, in the era of imperialism, capital plays a significant role in the socialization of labor. For instance, transnational corporations effectively address the national question. From a profit perspective, nations differ only quantitatively. Nevertheless, the economic interdependence of nations through commodity relations not only fails to lead to peace, but also provokes wars. Isn't it advantageous for capitalists to engage in wars among themselves, even if they risk losing profits? In 1909, Norman Angel's book *The Great Illusion* was published, explaining the impossibility of war between empires due to strong economic ties and the enormous cost of military actions. For Marxists, the onset of the First World War was merely a matter of time. The accuracy of Marxist positions can be observed in contemporary events. So, what common labor can put an end to violence? In Soviet conditions, it was common labor aimed at creating common industry. Currently, conditions do not allow for revolutionary and liberating industrial labor, but the opportunity to overcome one's ignorance and national narrow-mindedness is open to everyone. For a communist, it is not enough to just talk about respect for the Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian, American proletariat and hatred towards their respective national oppressors. A true communist must study the situation of the proletariat of any nationality, familiarize themselves with the achievements and progressive representatives of each nation. Getting acquainted with the revolutionary traditions of different peoples, developing a revolutionary way of thinking, active information exchange, translation activities. These are also forms of labor, much more complex and responsible than simply attending a rally against war or declaring slogans like "Workers of the world unite." Proletarians can only unite through collective action, a common impulse for liberation, and a shared effort to overcome their proletarian condition. If a Russian communist wants to establish contacts with the Ukrainian proletariat, they should first and foremost study the works of progressive Ukrainian figures. To stop a Ukrainian from appearing as a Bandera supporter, one must first know and understand are the Ukrainians themselves. How can there be any meaningful contact with Ukrainian proletarians without knowledge of the works of the aforementioned Taras Shevchenko, Ivan Franko, and Lesya Ukrainka? If you claim that Ukrainians themselves do not know who these figures truly are and why they are important for the proletarian movement, then show, from Russia, a different Ukraine. Demonstrate that you genuinely care about the fate and culture of these people. There is no greater dissonance for a nationalist than when a representative of another, especially an enemy nation, knows more about their culture and history than they do themselves. Lead by example to show that there is another Russia, Russia of Pushkin, Belinsky, Gerzen, Nekrasov, Chernyshevsky, and not of Nikolai Palkin, Pobedonostsov, Ilyin, and other conservatives. There is no nobler dream for a true patriot than to make their national culture a part of world culture. And there is no greater enemy for one's nation than those who wish to preserve their culture within narrow national boundaries. Any well-wishing outsider must be familiar with this culture and appeal to it, if he truly wants to move the situation even an inch closer to the lasting peace. Foreign media's point of view to support one or another side of the conflict is that of a bookie touting to bet on a match where the loser dies. However, in the coming world war, there will be no winners. You might say that we are once again calling for engaging in theory, book clubs, and intellectual work when there is a war going on. Well, take a cue from Lenin, who after the 1905 revolution wrote the philosophical work Materialism and Imperial Criticism. And during the First World War, instead of running to anti-war demonstrations, thoroughly studied Hegel and Marx. As we have discussed, for the Russian leftists, the choice remains either Lenin or Putin. In the modern era of reaction, there is no other way but to transform one's nation into a revolutionary theoretical one. A nation that denies its national limitations, and to assist comrades in other countries in overcoming their national narrow-mindedness. This war will end, but the rift between the peoples of the former USSR will only deepen, and the contradictions will not disappear. Only communists have the ability to build bridges and connections between proletarians in each country. Then the slogan "Workers of the world unite" will cease to be an abstract wish and will become a step towards real liberation.